Hey econ students, I wanted to talk you through absolute and comparative advantage type problems. What we're looking at is who's the best and then who's really the best. So what we're looking at is, let's talk Michael Phelps. Is Michael Phelps maybe the best swimmer ever? I would say yes. So in economics terms, I would say that he has an absolute advantage. So a person or nation has an absolute advantage when you can produce a particular good at a lower cost than any other person or nation. What does it take for Michael Phelps to win a gold medal? Not nearly so much as it would take for me to win a gold medal. So he's going to go ahead and have an absolute advantage at swimming, and I will not. One of the things we're going to look at with these types of problems is output versus input problems. Please make sure that you are looking at what the question is asking. So when I'm looking at these problems, an output problem is going to present data as a product produced given a set of resources. As an example, I give you a ton of plastic. How many pens can you produce? An input problem is going to present data as an amount of resources needed to produce a fixed amount of output. So how many hours does it take me to produce 1 bushel of wheat? When identifying your absolute advantage, remember that input problems change the scenario from who can produce the most to who can produce a given product with the least amount of resources. Now, let's take an example. We have Tom and Sam, and they're either fishing for trout or bass. What we're going to look at is if this is the number that they can catch per day, this is going to be an output problem. So then who has the absolute advantage? Well, if Tom can catch 4 trout and Sam can catch 24, I would say that Sam has the absolute advantage. Same thing with your bass fish. Sam clearly has an absolute advantage. Tom needs to stop stomping around in the water and learn some skills from Sam. If we look at this one, we've got apples and pears. Tom and Sam have come back. If this is the number of acres it takes to produce 1 unit of apples or 1 unit of pears, this is going to be an input problem. So then who has the absolute advantage? Remember, it's going to be the person with the lowest inputs to create a unit of that fruit. So in this case, Sam can do it in 6 acres. Tom needs 10 acres to produce a unit of apples. So Sam is going to have the absolute advantage in apples, and Sam is also going to have the absolute advantage in pears. Now, one more example for you. Sometimes it's not so straightforward. In this case, I give you 1 ton of olives. What can you produce? Well, same fixed resources, we're looking here at an output problem. So if Zaire can make 60 cans of olives and Colombia can make 24, Zaire is going to have the absolute advantage in canned olives. Colombia, however, can make 10, we'll call it liters of olive oil, where Zaire can make 8. So in this case, Zaire has the absolute advantage at canned olives, and Colombia has the absolute advantage in olive oil. If these countries are friendly with each other, they live near each other, they should look at each other and say, hey, if I make canned olives and you make olive oil, maybe we could trade and be better off and have more stuff at the end of this transaction. So what this brings up is something called comparative advantage. We said already that absolute advantage is when a person or a nation has an absolute advantage when you can produce a particular good at a lower cost than another person or nation. Comparative advantage is a little different. Comparative advantage is the ability of one person or nation to produce a good at a lower opportunity cost than that of another person or nation. Remember, opportunity cost, what you give up to get what you want. Now this is going to bring up a little bit of logic that we're going to have to figure out. So let's look at what one of these problems would look like. Given the same resources, we're going to assume that Germany and Italy can make either freezers or dishwashers. So what you're going to do is you're going to have a chart that looks like this that's going to show me that Germany, they take half of their economy and can make 1,000 freezers. They take half of their economy, they can make 500 dishwashers. For Italy, they can only make 800 freezers or 200 dishwashers. So the first step is going to be absolute advantage. Who is the best at making freezers? Clearly it's Germany, who can make 1,000 freezers. Who is the best at making dishwashers? Clearly it's also Germany, as they make 500 dishwashers compared to Italy's 200. Does that mean that Germany should make all the stuff and the Italians should sit around and have French bread? No, not so much. We need to figure out who has the lowest opportunity cost for producing these goods. So the first step is to get these numbers into a manageable size so that we can set up some proportions. So the first thing I'm going to do is look at Germany. If I have 1,000 freezers and I compare them to 500 dishwashers, how can I set that up? I'm going to look at 1,000 to 500, and I'm going to set that up as a 2-to-1 or a 1-to-2 ratio. 500 goes into 1,000 twice. 1,000 can be divided in half and become 500. Then I'm going to look at Italy. Italy has got 800 freezers to 200 dishwashers. I can go ahead and reduce that down and say I'm looking at a 1-to-4 ratio. Now, once I figured this out, it doesn't tell me anything. It's just going to make my math life a little bit easier. What I want to do is figure out the opportunity cost. When I make one of this, I could have been making how many of that? To do that, I personally like to set myself up a chart. And so I'm going to say, okay, for Germany, every time I make one dishwasher, I give up the ability to make 2 freezers. For Italy, every time they make one dishwasher, they give up the ability to make 4 freezers. That's pretty straightforward. It's the other side that's a little bit harder. So if you look at the chart that I made, we have the 1 to whatever ratio. So one dishwasher is going to be 2 freezers here. One dishwasher is 4 freezers. But then I need to look at the other opportunity cost. So for Germany, every time I make a freezer, I give up the ability to make half of a dishwasher. For Italy, every time I make a freezer, I could have been making 1/4 of a dishwasher. Now, this is going to help me out. Do you see how all of them have a 1 in the left-hand side? Because I want to reduce this down and make it so that it's very straightforward. 1 of this equals how many of that? 1 of this equals how many of that? Because then I can compare them. So if I'm looking at dishwashers, who is the best at making dishwashers? Well, for Germany, every time they make a dishwasher, they give up 2 freezers. For Italy, they're giving up 4 freezers. So Germany actually has the lower opportunity cost at making freezers. I'm sorry, for making dishwashers. And if I look at freezers, every time Germany makes a freezer, they give up 1/2 of a dishwasher. But for Italy, they make a freezer and they only give up 1/4 of a dishwasher. This means that they are actually at a comparative advantage for making freezers. So what does that tell me about this situation? Germany might have the absolute advantage at both freezers and dishwashers, but when you look a little bit closer, Germany has a lower opportunity cost at dishwashers. Italy has a lower opportunity cost at freezers. They should work on making the products that they have those advantages for, and then engage in trade to get what they need from the other country. One more example for you. We've got Matt and Jenny. They can either program a computer or fix a bike. So I'm going to do the same thing here. These are already reduced down as far as I can, so I'm going to set up my comparison chart. I'm going to say that for Matt, every time he fixes a bike, he could have been fixing 2 computers. Every time he fixes a computer, he could get through about half of a bike repair. For Jenny, she's a 1-to-1. She's pretty easy. Every time she fixes a bike, it could have been 1 computer. Every time she fixes a computer, it could have been 1 bike. So then I look at my advantages. For bikes, Matt gives up the ability to fix 2 computers every time he fixes a bike. Jenny only gives up 1 computer. So Jenny will have your comparative advantage at fixing bikes. If you look at computers, Matt only gives up half of a bike when he fixes a computer, whereas Jenny gives up a whole bike repair. Matt should focus on fixing bikes. So what we say is that Matt has a comparative advantage over Jenny at programming, and Jenny has a comparative advantage over Matt at bicycle repairs. To give you an idea of what this might look like on a multiple choice test, here's an old test question that you can take a look at. So before specialization in trade, the domestic opportunity cost of producing 1 ton of grain in alpha and beta is which of the following? They're pretending like those are countries. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, so for alpha, their grain output, they can output 30 tons of grain or 30 tons of steel. That's a 1-to-1 ratio. So I can get rid of answers C and E because I know it's going to be a 1 from alpha. So then I have to look at beta. Every time they make 10 tons of grain, they could have been making 20 tons of steel. So what I'm looking for here is an answer that's going to tell me that they're going to give, wrong direction, B, 1 ton of steel, and beta is going to give 2 tons of steel. So sometimes you have to do a little bit of manipulation. You're going to have to draw out some graphs. You're going to have to look at what's going on. But hopefully you can figure these out.